Maseches Yevamos Daf Kuf Gimel contains a number of statements of the Gemara analyzing our Mishnah. We'll begin with a sugya concerning a statement made by Rava, where Rava is trying to resolve a contradiction between two Mishnayos about the halachic status of a sak. The Gemara will try to support Rava's statement with a brisa. The Gemara will then analyze the brisa and try to understand it. The Gemara will introduce a number of halachas from a Meimar. So the Gemara has brought a contradiction as to what is the halacha of a sak of an anpilya. We have some sources that said that it is kosher, it counts as a shoe. Le'inyan chalitza, le'inyan yom kippur, it counts as a shoe. And then the Gemara had some sources that it does not count as a shoe. So Rava said it depends what the sak is made out of. If it's made out of cloth, it does not count as a shoe. If it's made out of leather, it does count as a shoe. Now the Gemara wants to show that that's true. The Gemara is going to show that by bringing a brisa that lists a number of chalitzas that are kosher, a number of chalitzas that are pasul. One of the kosher ones will be chalitza with a sak made of leather and an ampilya of leather, and one of the pasul ones will be chalitza with an ampilya made out of cloth. Then the Gemara will analyze the brisa more in depth to see who the author is. So let's see the brisa. So the brisa says if somebody does chalitza with a shoe which is torn that covers the majority of the foot, or if it's a sandal. So the first one was a minnow. Minnow is a soft shoe that you could use the word torn for. A sandal is hard, and that would be broken. If it's broken, it still covers the majority of the foot. Or it's made out of a material called sha'am or sieve, type of rubber or fiber. Or if he does chalitza using the encasing that is placed on the stump of the legs of somebody whose legs are missing, they're not there. This is kind of like a fake leg that the stump of the regular leg fits into, and he uses it to lean on as he walks. So if he uses that, or if he uses a cloth covering for the stumps of the legs, or if he uses a kind of device that the legs are inserted into that he can't walk on, it's just something to protect the legs, and then he drags himself by his hands. Or if he uses an anpilya sha'ar, a sak made out of leather, there's our focus. Or if you do chalitza on an adult, or chalitza on someone who is, whether he's standing, sitting, or lying down, or chalitza on a person who's blind, all these are kosher chalitza. So in there we had a sak made out of leather. Now, here's the list of chalitzas that are pasul. If he uses a minnow which is torn, or sandal which is broken and it does not cover the majority of the foot, or if he uses coverings to put on the hands for the person who drags himself, whose legs are twisted or broken or cut off, and he needs to drag himself. So he's got his legs inserted in certain things. The stumps of his legs are inserted in certain things which protect them, but he drags himself along, so he needs to protect his hands as well because they're on the ground. So the coverings that he has for his hands, those are no good for chalitza, even though they kind of walks with them. Or an anpilya shel veged, that's a cloth sack. There's our other proof. Or if he does chalitza on a child, or so these are all chalitzas that are psula. So there you see the proof to Rava that chalitza with a sack is kosher. It's made out of leather. If it's made out of cloth, it is pasul. Now the Gemara says, let's analyze this brisa though and see who it is, and this may actually be a problem on our potential proof to Rava. So first of all, this Mishnah says that it's kosher if you use the stumps, if you use the encasings that go on the stumps of the legs. Now we had Gzeira earlier, with Gzeira Sakasav Analcha Tachash, it has to be made out of leather. So obviously this is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who does not hold that it has to be made out of leather. Now, how do we know that it's Rabbi Meir and that he doesn't hold it has to be made out of leather? So there's a machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi whether the encasings of the stumps are considered shoes as far as Hilchos Shabbos. Rabbi Meir says they are considered shoes and you're allowed to carry them, you're allowed to go out with them, and Rabbi Yossi says that they are not. So it's definitely Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Meir must not hold of Anacha Tachash, and must not hold of the Gzeira that it has to be made out of leather, because these stumps are not made out of leather, they're made out of wood. So Gemara says the problem is that later we say that a sack made out of cloth is no good. And the reason that a sack made out of cloth would be no good is because it's not leather. So that sounds like the Rabbanan who do hold of Gzeira that it's Vanacha Tachash has to be leather. So who is the author of this brisa? On the one hand, the beginning is Rabbi Meir because he says that the stump casings count as shoes. On the other hand, it can't be Rabbi Meir, it has to be the Rabbanan because they hold that it has to be leather and not cloth. So how do you resolve this? The Gemara has two ways to resolve this. One is to say that the entire brisa is the Rabbanan, and one is to say the entire brisa is Rabbi Meir. So the Gemara first quotes Abayi's approach. He says the entire brisa is the Rabbanan. You do hold it has to be Vanacha Tachash, it has to be leather, and the reason that the stumps are okay, the encasings of the stumps are okay, is because there's a leather lining inside the stump there, and therefore it counts as a leather shoe. So Rava says that wouldn't make sense, because if the only reason it's kosher, the stump casings are kosher is because they have a leather lining. So instead of going to a different case of a sock made out of cloth, to give me an example of a case that's puzzle, you should talk about a case where you have the stump casings without the leather lining. That would be the most closest case, and we always try to pick the closest case to the different halacha. So obviously this is not correct. So Rabbi therefore says it's Zom Shad. He says it's all Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Meir holds that all that you do not have to have anacha tachash. There's no xeris akasav that it has to be leather. However, it does have to protect the foot. If it doesn't protect the foot, it's not a shoe. A cloth sock doesn't protect the shoe, even though it's something which goes around the stump, or you could put it around the foot. It's different than the stump casings, which are made out of wood. That protects the foot. This does not protect the foot. And therefore, Rabbi Meir will agree, for other reasons, without banachat tachash, he'll agree that a soft cloth sock does not help, and it doesn't count. All right, now the Gemara brings a number of halachas said by Rabbi Meir. So said by Ameimar. So Ameimar says somebody who performs chalitza has to stick his legs into the ground. That is, after the shoe is removed, he should stuff his feet into the ground afterwards. So Gemara says that Rav Ashi asks, was this brisa? We just learned the brisa that says he can be standing, sitting, or lying. Now, if he's lying, he probably doesn't have his legs stuck into the ground. It's not a normal way to lie down. Gemara says no, he's lying, but he still has to have his legs be stuck into the ground. So now the Gemara says another halacha of Ameimar. So Ameimar said, someone whose feet are twisted and he walks on the upper surface of the foot, that his feet are almost upside down, so you can't do chalitza on him because he doesn't have a shoe that he walks on in a normal way. So that chalitza wouldn't work. So Gemara says, but we learned that somebody who has casings over his legs and he drags his legs behind him, that's a good chalitza. So that would seem to imply that even though his legs are twisted and he's dragging them behind him, still you can do chalitza on the casings that go around that. Gemara says it's not talking about doing chalitza on him. It's talking about take the casings and put them on somebody else whose feet are straight. You could use them as a shoe, and that works there. Okay, now the Gemara says, based on this halacha of a member that you can't do chalitza on somebody whose feet are twisted, we couldn't do chalitza to bar uba, we couldn't do chalitza to bar kifuf. These are two people who had twisted legs. Bar uba is a man's name. We don't know who he is. Bar kifuf, Rashi says, for sort of Sheshes, who had his legs twisted. The Gemara now refers back to the Mishnah where we had seen the halacha that someone whose legs are cut, so he needs to have enough of his leg left on in order to be able to be considered leg to be able to do chalitza. And we said that the border is the knee. If it's cut at the knee or lower, then he has enough leg to do chalitza. If it's cut higher, then he can't do chalitza. So the Gemara says this is surprising because if it's cut at the knee, all that's left is the thigh, the limb called the thigh. And we had a Xeris HaKasav in the sugya of Shalosh Regalim that somebody who doesn't have legs, somebody who was cut at the knee, doesn't have to be Ola Regel, because the mitzvah of Ali Ola Regel is only for somebody who has a regel. He uses the word regel. This person doesn't have a regel. Regel is gone if it's cut at the knee. So he doesn't have that mitzvah. Now the word regel is used here as well. It says V'choltan ale me'al ragloi. So he also shouldn't have a regel. Even if it's cut at the knee, we should say he doesn't have a regel and he can't do chalitza. So Gemara says there's a difference. About regalim, it doesn't use the word me'al regalim. It just says regalim. Here it says me'al ragloi. Me'al means from above. So above the regel. Even above the regel itself, even if the whole regel is missing and the shoe is going to be worn above the place of the regel, that means that it's cut at the knee. So the entire regel is missing, but it's put on above the regel. That's good. And that still counts as me'al ragloi. Shalosh regalim doesn't say me'al. So the Gemara says, well, if that's true that me'al ragel is good, so why is it only good if it's cut at the knee? What if it's cut higher than the knee? It's still me'al ragel, it's still above the regel. So the Gemara says, no, that's me'al de me'al, that's above the above. It has to be right at the border of above, right at the place where the regel ends, just above. If it's cut there, you can put on above that. Any higher is above the above. Says the Gemara that this teaches me that the bone of the leg reaches all the way to the floor. That is, the shin bone reaches from the knee all the way into the ground, into the heel. There is not another bone or limb in the heel underneath the leg bone. Because if it was, then that would be the me'al, and above that would be me'al de me'al, because we would say that the bone which is on the ground, that's the foot. The leg bone itself is considered the me'al, so anything above that, meaning at the knee, should be me'al de me'al, and that should be no good. So that's the Gemara's claim. The Gemara says that the name of Rav Papa. And says Rav Ashi disagreed. Rav Ashi said, no, it could even be a bone in the foot. Since the leg bone, the shin bone, goes into the foot, it counts as foot. Therefore, the entire shin bone has the same foot, and at the knee is where you begin me'al the foot. Now, this is all working with the understanding that the word regel only refers to the lower leg bone. That the limb above the knee, what we call the thigh, cannot be applied the word regel. If that could be called a regel, so then when the Torah says to do chalitza on the regel, then you should be able to do it even if it was cut above the knee, because that should be also called a regel. So the Gemara is going to show a few places where the word regel seems to refer to the thigh, and the Gemara is going to reject them all. So the Gemara first says in the Telchacha in Devarim Kisavo, it says, and a woman's placenta which comes out from between her ragaleha. Now, the placenta obviously comes out between the thighs, because that's where it exits the body. So it must be referring to the thighs when it says from between ragaleha. So you see ragaleha refers to the thighs. So the Gemara says, no, when a woman gives birth, she squats and folds her legs under her, and therefore the legs, the shins, the lower leg from the knee to the ankle is folded right up next to the thighs, and therefore it's really coming out from between the legs as well. Okay, the Gemara's next proof is, it says, lo asa ragla v'lo asa shefamo. This is referring to Mifi Vaishes, who waited for David HaMelech to come after he was chased away by Avshalom, and he was in mourning. He didn't take care of himself until David returned. It says he didn't do his legs and he didn't do his mustache. So didn't do his legs, the Gemara understands, means he did not shave his lower beard. So that's referred to as do his legs. But obviously that's referring to his thighs, because that's where the beard is. So the Gemara says this is it's a euphemistic language over here. We could have said thighs, but we use the word regel to refer to that area of the body as a euphemism. I think whereas the next proof it says about Shaul, and he went to relieve himself, it says lahaseiches raglov, to cover his legs. But of course, that's not something that has to do with legs. That's something that has to do with thighs. That's the area of the body that's functional there. So Gemara says again, this is a euphemistic language. We use the term regel, even though we're referring to the higher limbs. Next, Gemara says about Eglon. Over there, it also says it refers to relieving oneself as meisech raglov b'cheder hamakoira. Over there, when Eglon was killed by Ehud, and he locked the room, and Eglon didn't come out for a while, his avadim thought that he was relieving himself. So there, the phrase that's used is meisech hu raglov. Again, the term regel is used, and it's obviously referring to the upper legs. The Gemara says, no, again, lishna ma'aliyah, that's also euphemistic language. Next thing Gemara refers to when a Sisra was Boel Yael, and there the expression that's used is Bein Ragleha Kara. He lay down between her legs, and of course Ragleha there refers to the thighs. It says again, it's Lishnamayah, it's a euphemistic expression. We don't want to discuss openly the thighs. Now the Gemara goes into a bit of a gadata on this topic. The Gemara says that Sisra did 7 be'ilos. If you look in the pasuk describing it, it uses a word that refers to lying or falling 7 times. It says bein raglei kara nafal shachov, bein raglei kara nafal basher kara sham nafal shodud. So it says kara nafal shachov, kara nafal. It uses those words. There are 7 of those words for the 7 be'ilos that he did. Someone asks, how was Yael allowed to do that? She got hana from a Maisa Aveira, even though she did it l'shem shemayim in order to tire out Sisra so that she could kill him, but she still got hana from it. How is that allowed? The Gemara says, what's a hana, what's a good thing for the Rishonim, is not hana for the tzaddikim. She was, on the contrary, disgusted from it. The Gemara says, where do you see that? So when Lavan was warned not to start up with Yaakov, he was told by Hashem, don't say anything good or bad. I understand why I shouldn't say something bad. Why shouldn't I say something good to Yaakov? Obviously, then, what Lavan considers to be good would be bad for Yaakov. So there you see that what a Rosh considers to be good, a Tzaddik considers to be bad, and therefore what Sisra considered to be good, Yael considered to be bad, and she didn't get any hana from this. So I understand that in the case of Yaakov, because Lavan would have said the name of his avodah zaros, which he considers to be good, which Yaakov considers to be bad, of course. But here, what bad could be involved? Someone says there is a bad. And Akum has a zuhama. Rav Yochanan says at the time that the Nachash in Gan Eden, the Nachash HaKadmoni, came onto Chava, he put a zuhama onto her, and when Klai Yisrael stood at Har Sinai, that zuhama, that smell was removed. However, she, by being nizdakek to an oved kolchavim here, would be re-receiving that zuama that she had lost at Har Sinai. The Gemara now refers back to the Mishnah where we had seen the halacha that the shoe does not have to belong to the Yevamos. The Gemara says, how do you know that halacha? The Gemara says the Torah would seem to say otherwise. The Torah says that it has to be na'alo. It says v'cholza na'alo. You should remove his shoe. So we're going to Brisa. It says his shoe, that seems to imply that it has to belong to him. But later when it says you call him at base chalutz hana'al, that includes even a shoe that is not his. It doesn't say na'alo there, it just says na'al. The Gemara says, then what's the point of saying na'alo in the first place? The Gemara says you learn it doesn't have to belong to him, but it has to be like it belongs to him, meaning that it has to fit him. If it's too big and he can't walk in it, or if it's too small and it doesn't cover the majority of his foot, or if it's missing the heel, so it doesn't function, then it's no good, it doesn't count as na'alo. The Gemara now quotes an incident about a shoe which didn't belong to the Yavam. The Gemara says that Abaye was standing in front of Yav Yosef, and the Yavam came to do chalitza. Now apparently the Yavam didn't have a shoe, so Rav Yosef told Abaye, give him your shoe. So Abaye went and he gave him the left shoe. Now you're not supposed to use the left shoe. The Mishnah had said that using the left shoe on the right foot is kosher, but not lechatchila. So Abaye did that because Abaye held that to use a shoe which doesn't belong to him would also be kosher, not lechatchila. So in order to enforce that halacha, he gave a shoe which wouldn't be kosher lechatchila. So Rav Yosef said to him, he said, why are you giving him your left shoe? That's only b'di'evet, not lechatchila. So Abaye responded and he said, using someone else's shoe is also not lechatchila. So Rav Yosef said, I meant for you to give it to him and be maknet to him, make it his. I didn't mean lend it to him. Next, the Mishnah had said that it's kosher to use a wooden shoe. The Gemara says this is Rabbi Meir's opinion. As we saw earlier, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi argue about a wooden shoe, whether it counts as a shoe in Shabbos. So Rabbi Meir says that it's a shoe. So the Gemara says that this has to be Rabbi Meir. The Gemara says that Avu Deshmo said no, this could even be Rabbi Yossi. It's talking about where the wooden shoe had a leather lining. The Gemara now goes into the sugya, what happens if you have a shoe that has tzaras on it? The issue is that a shoe that has tzaras on it, sometimes, depending on what level of tzaras it has to be destroyed. The halacha is something which is going to be destroyed, is considered destroyed already. Now, it's actually physically here, but halachically it's considered destroyed. Nafkamina is, do you have the shear? Do you have the minimum size of the shoe? If it's considered destroyed, you don't have the size. The shoe is gone, halachically, you shouldn't be able to use it. So whether or not you say that concept, which is called ketusei michdas shear, is considered to be destroyed already, and therefore it doesn't have the minimum shear, that's a machlokes. So the Gemara says it's a machlokes of Papi and Rav Papa, what Rava said. According to Rav Papi, a shoe which is musgar, you cannot use for chalitza lechatchila. Gzeira atu, a shoe which is muchlat. Muskar is if it's locked up, it's not vade tzaras. Muchlat is if it's certainly tzaras. Now Rav Papi holds that a muchlat where it's vade tzaras is considered to be destroyed and you can't use it. And if we make a gzeira, even if it's just musgar, you can't use that either. But if you did, then it's kosher. Rav Papa says no, both of them you should not use lechatchila, but b'diavad it's kosher because you don't say this concept of ketusei michdas shira, it's still considered like it has a shear. So now the Gemara tries to bring proofs on the subject. So the Gemara brings a proof. And the Brisa says, what is the halacha of being mitame from touching a house that has tzaras? So we know that the halacha is that if you have a house which is a musgar, so you only tell me if you go into the house or if you touch the inner wall of the house. It's two different girses in Rashi, how you touch the inner wall of the house without going into it. Either you went in the wrong way, in a not normal way, or you just stuck your hand in. Now, if, however, it is a muchlat, so then even if you touch the outside of the house, it's matame. So the first question is, how, if it's the house has to be destroyed, and you're telling me that something which has to be destroyed is considered like it's gone, so how is touching the house an issue? The house isn't even there. It's considered to be gone already. How could it be matame you? First, it's not a problem. Here you have Exeris HaKasav that calls that house, even though it's supposed to be destroyed, you have Exeris HaKasav that overrides the general concept of ketusei michdas shira, because it says, v'natas etz apayis, even when you're destroying the house, it calls it habayis, it calls it the house. So it still has the din of a house. Next, the Gemara asks from the halacha of a cloth which has taras on it, where the halacha is that if you bring the cloth into a house, it's metame ba'oel. The entire house and everything that's in it becomes tame ba'oel. So the halacha there is that it depends on the size of the cloth. You have to have that it's 3 fingers by 3 fingers, that is the minimum size of a cloth, or you have to have a concise of the cloth being in the house. Now, 3 fingers by 3 fingers might not be a concise, because if it's a very thin cloth, so then it's not a concise. Still, if the 3 fingers by 3 fingers goes into the house, or if a majority of it goes into the house, it's matame the entire house. So the Gemara says, obviously you see that you do not say that the shear is missing because it has to be burned because it has tsaras. So the Gemara says, first of all, who says it's talking about where it's mukhlat? Maybe they're talking about where it's muskar. And if it's muskar, it's not vaday tsaras. It doesn't have to be burned at all. So that's what's matame. It's still matame, and it's matame the house once you bring it into the house. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, so then the next part of the brisa, where it says that if it's thick cloth, and therefore even if it has a number of kizesim in it, even if you don't put 3 fingers by 3 fingers into the house, just you put a kizayis into the house, that's also matame the house. Now where would you get that halacha from, that a kizayis is matame the house? That comes from the fact you have a hekesh between tsaras and mace. Just like a mace is matame with kizayis, tsaras is also matame with kizayis. Where do you get that from? Because Miriam says, al not tehek hameis. Miriam, who was a mukhlat, is called a mace. So you see there's a connection between a mukhlat and a mace. That only makes sense if this case that we're talking about here is a mukhlat. We're talking about a muskar. So when it says, you're right, I will answer you a different answer. We're talking about a mukhlat. However, there's a kassav here that considers it to be an existing cloth and not burned up, even though it is a mukhlat, and even though it's supposed to be burned, because it says v'sarf es habeged. Even though you're going to be burning it, it's still called habeged. It's still called the cloth. Says the Gemara, great. So I see over here a source where it says that a cloth is still considered to be a beged, even though it's going to be burned. So learn from there that anything is still considered to be there. It's all there still, I should say, and that I should learn from there that the shoe is also considered to be there, even if it's supposed to be burned and it's a chalitza. So the Gemara says, no, you can't learn Isser from Tumah. Tumah and Isser are different categories of halacha. As far as Tumah is concerned, it's considered to be there, and therefore it's matame. As far as Isser, to do chalitza, it's not. Now the Gemara quotes a ruling of Rava on the matter. Rava says, some instances you will say that it's considered to be burned and there's no shear, and some you won't. How so? So he says as follows. As far as taras goes, whether it's muzgar or mukhlat, we have exeris akasav. You do learn from v'saraf es habeged. It's not a problem of tumah from isser from tumah, just a giloy. It reveals that cloth is considered to be existing even though it's supposed to be burned. So there's no problem of shear being missing. Now, what about avodah zarah shoes? So here he says it depends. If it's shoes that you put on the statue, so there it's not a tikroives avodas kichavim, it's a mishamshei avodas kichavim. You can take off the status of mishamshei avodas kichavim, and you're allowed to use it. Doesn't have to be burned. Therefore, you could use it. It's not considered to be ketuse mechtas shira. You could use it for chalitza. Shlichat chila, you shouldn't use any of these things for chalitza, but it's kosher if you did, because the shear is not considered to be missing. However, something which was tikroiv as avodah, you actually brought it as a sacrifice, as a gift for the avodah zarah, or if it was part of an erani dachas, both those things have to be burned completely, and therefore it's no good, even b'diavad. Now, another thing which is no good is a shoe that's made for an old man to put on him as a shroud, something you put on him after the death. So that is not designed for walking. No one's ever going to walk in that shoe. And therefore, it doesn't count as a shoe for chalitza. A shoe for chalitza has to be one that people walk in. Someone says, what do you mean? The Beis Din has a set shoe that they use for chalitza. That set shoe that they use for chalitza, nobody walks in it. It's only made for a chalitza. Someone says, no, but they're not makbid that nobody should walk in it. They'd be very happy if people were to walk in it. Therefore, it's fit for walking, and it's not a problem.